I'm not proud of it. In fact, I've spent most of my life trying to bury that memory. But it keeps resurfacing, like a bad dream I can't escape. Maybe it's time someone heard it. I was 32 years old when I realized that everything I had built no longer made sense. I was married to Lucy, a woman I loved, who believed in me, in us, in the life we were building together. We had stability that seemed perfect. But over time, I started to feel like it was suffocating me. Everything was predictable, everything was right. And at some point, I realized that I needed to break free. I had a life that many would call a dream, but I felt trapped in it. I told Lucy I was going to Chicago for a business trip. That was the lie. In reality, I was heading to New York. To Rachel. When I boarded the plane, I felt this rush of freedom. I was on the verge of something new. I was no longer tied down by responsibilities. I wasn't the man I had been in my daily life. In New York, I could be anyone. I could be me. Rachel was different. She wasn't the kind of woman you introduce to your family, or talk about a future with. She wasn't stable, she was spontaneous, unpredictable, full of life in a way Lucy couldn't be. I convinced myself that Rachel was what I needed, that she was the spark I had been missing. I told myself it would just be a weekend, just a break from everything. But it wasn't just a weekend. It was the beginning of something bigger. But once you take that first step into the lie, it's hard to stop. We stayed in a modest hotel near Central Park. It wasn't luxurious, but it didn't need to be. The city itself was the real attraction. I had no plans, no responsibilities. I was just here to be with Rachel, to enjoy the moment. I didn't feel guilty at first. It felt like an adventure, a secret I could keep to myself. But as I walked down the crowded streets of New York, holding Rachel's hand, I realized just how far I had gone. This wasn't just a fling. I was lying to my wife, my partner of 8 years. And somehow, I convinced myself it didn't matter. I thought about Lucy. I imagined her sitting at home, trusting me, waiting for my call. Believing in me. I had built my life on her trust, on the stability we had created together. And here I was, living a completely different reality in New York. For the first time, I felt guilty. It was the first crack in the perfect illusion I had built. But even then, I didn't stop. I didn't want to stop. It was like stepping off a cliff, and now I was falling. I didn't know how to stop the fall. The next morning, we had breakfast in a small cafe. Rachel was laughing, talking about the plans we had for the day. I couldn't focus. As much as I tried to enjoy the moment, the reality of what I was doing hit me again. This wasn't just a fling. It wasn't a weekend escape. I was betraying my wife, my partner of 8 years. And somehow, I convinced myself it didn't matter. I spent the day with Rachel, doing things I would never do with Lucy. We wandered around the city, eating food that felt too rich, too indulgent. I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that I was living someone else's life. But I buried it. The more I buried it, the easier it became to enjoy the moment. I could be anyone here. I didn't have to be the man Lucy trusted. I could be the man Rachel wanted me to be. But lies have a way of catching up with you. It didn't take long for that nagging feeling to become a full-on weight in my chest. I kept thinking about Lucy, about how she would react when she found out the truth. But I pushed the thought aside. I didn't want to think about it. I was here now. I was with Rachel. That's all that mattered. But then, as the night wore on and I walked back to the hotel with Rachel, the weight of everything came crashing down. I thought about how Lucy would be feeling. The trust one had shattered, the promises I had broken. And for the first time, I felt guilty. But it was too late for that now. I had crossed a line. And now, there was no going back. I didn't know what to do. Everything felt hazy, like in a fog, and each moment seemed to stretch longer. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring out the window at the noisy New York cityscape, but I couldn't see the city. My thoughts were far away, elsewhere, far from Rachel, far from this city. I thought about Lucy. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't shake the feeling. Lucy. She was at home, thinking I was dead. She believed I was on that flight that crashed. She was waiting for me, believing I'd return. But I wouldn't return. I wasn't on that flight. I wasn't even in Chicago, like I said. I was here, in New York, with another woman. I sat there, and I thought about Lucy, about what she must be doing right now. How was she coping with it? How would she feel when she found out the truth? That I wasn't on that flight. That I had lied to her. How could I explain that? I tried to imagine what she would feel. But the more I thought about it, the worse it got. I knew she was sitting at home, perhaps checking for some news, but she couldn't find any information about what happened. No one could tell her the truth. She thought I was dead. I was dead to her. And once I realized that, it made me feel cold inside. I knew that if I went back, if I told her the truth, everything would be shattered. I couldn't do it. But now I was trapped. I was sitting here in New York, with Rachel, thinking about what I would do if Lucy found out. What would happen then? What was I supposed to do with this weight, this fear, this anxiety? I could feel the fear growing. I thought about what Lucy would be going through, how she would be suffering, believing I was on that flight. It was a disaster, and I was part of that disaster, not by my own will, but still a part of it. Could I tell her I was alive? Could I tell her the truth? With each passing hour, the thought that I couldn't go back, that I couldn't tell her, became more suffocating. I thought about what would happen if Lucy ever found out. What should I do with this burden, with this fear, with this worry? I looked at Rachel again. She was sitting next to me, happy, unaware that I was consumed with guilt. I began to realize I couldn't continue this lie. But what was I supposed to say? How could I tell her? That I had made a mistake? That I was married, and now I was destroying my life? I didn't know how to explain that. Every minute felt like an eternity. I looked at her, and for the first time, I thought she might have noticed that something wasn't right. Maybe she sensed that I was pulling away from her. I tried to smile, but inside, I was incapable of doing so. But there was no way back. At that moment, sitting with Rachel, I realized that I couldn't continue this life, this lie. I was trapped, and I didn't know how to get out. I couldn't just go back and tell Lucy the truth. I didn't know how to tell her that I was alive, that I had lied to her, that I had betrayed her trust. And then, when I started thinking about what would happen next, when Lucy would finally find out the truth, I felt unbearable fear. I couldn't allow myself to think she would ever forgive me for this. I couldn't even imagine looking her in the eyes. I stood up, walked out of the room, and moved toward the window. I couldn't stop my thoughts. My world, my life, everything I had built was crumbling in front of me. I already knew that I couldn't go back to the life I knew before. It was impossible. I didn't know how to start over, how to redeem myself for everything I had done. But I also knew that hiding this any longer wasn't possible. I didn't know what to do, but I understood that, sooner or later, I would have to confess. And when that moment came, everything would change. But what would happen next, I didn't know. I stood at the edge, not knowing what to do next. Time seemed to slow down, and everything around me felt unreal. I felt like my entire world was falling apart. Lucy, sitting at home, unaware that I was alive. Believing that I had died. Rachel beside me, and I could see the growing suspicion in her eyes, as if she was beginning to sense that something wasn't right. I didn't know how to explain to her that I couldn't keep hiding the truth anymore. But how could I tell her that everything we had built was based on a lie? How could I explain that, despite everything, I was still tied to my past, to Lucy, to the life I had destroyed? I didn't know how to confess. How to say that this wasn't a mistake. That I had betrayed both Lucy and Rachel. I didn't know how to keep living with this weight. I could feel the fear tightening around me. Every day, every moment, I felt like I couldn't hide anymore. I couldn't go back. I couldn't face Lucy, knowing I had destroyed her life, shattered the trust she had in me. I couldn't look her in the eyes and tell her I had been with another woman. But I couldn't stay with Rachel either. No matter how much I tried to convince myself that it could be different with her, I knew deep down that it couldn't be. She didn't deserve this. But I didn't know what I wanted. I thought that maybe my life with Rachel could be something else, but now I understood that I was just running away from reality. From what I had done. From what I had broken. Rachel, too, was beginning to feel it. With each passing day, she became more alert, noticing that something wasn't right. But I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't destroy everything we had, even though I had already destroyed my life. I sat next to her, but I wasn't really there. My mind was far away. Back in that house, where Lucy was sitting, unaware that I was alive. With every passing moment, it became harder to stay in this state. This wasn't just a mistake. I realized I was breaking everything I had built. I couldn't even justify it to myself. How could I have done this? I don't know how much time passed, but one morning, at some point, when I sat in that same hotel room, next to Rachel, I realized I couldn't keep lying anymore. I couldn't keep hiding from reality. I couldn't keep being someone I wasn't. I stood up and walked to the window. I opened it, hoping to breathe in the air, but everything felt so heavy that I couldn't even take a deep breath. I tried to think, to understand what to do. I didn't have an answer. I didn't know what would happen next. I understood that everything I knew was destroyed. And the thing I had to do was inevitable, but I couldn't find the strength to do it. I looked at Rachel, sitting on the bed. She didn't ask, but I could tell she felt it. That she was starting to understand that something was wrong. I couldn't hide my guilt any longer, but I was afraid that would be the end. Every step I took felt like a step into the unknown. I didn't know what would happen after I told her the truth. I didn't know how she would react. But I already understood that this moment was inevitable. I didn't know how to begin. But it was a defining moment. Everything I knew was falling apart, and all I had left was to face the consequences. Every day I spent in New York started to feel like a day in a cage. I couldn't shake the feeling that everything around me was falling apart. The time I spent with Rachel was overshadowed by the shadow of the life I had created. I was with her, but at the same time, I wasn't. My thoughts were elsewhere, with Lucy, who was now sitting at home, thinking I was dead. I tried to get rid of this feeling, but it haunted me. With each passing day, I felt the weight of my lie bearing down on me, building up, tightening inside. I couldn't go back. I couldn't return to the life I once built, but I didn't know how to move forward. Rachel noticed it. She didn't ask, but I saw how she started to sense that I was pulling away. Sometimes, when we sat together, I could see her gaze, a look that carried suspicion. She didn't say anything, but I knew she could feel it. And I couldn't explain to her what was happening. I couldn't tell her that I was dead to Lucy, that I had ruined everything I could have kept. I didn't know how long it would take before Lucy started to suspect something. But I felt it was coming. She couldn't not notice that I was gone. And then, one day, when I sat in a cafe with Rachel, the thought that struck me was like a cold shiver. Lucy might have already checked the passenger list for that flight. She could find out that I wasn't on it. She could suspect that something wasn't right. And if she finds out that I wasn't on that plane, everything will come crashing down. I couldn't let that happen. I started running scenarios in my head, as my thoughts spiraled. Lucy, sitting at home, lost, not understanding anything, but sensing something wasn't right. What if she figured it out? Maybe she was already checking, calling the airline, looking for information. She could have found out I wasn't on that flight. My thoughts spun out of control, like a whirlwind. I thought about how she would feel when she found out I had lied to her. How would she react when she learns that I wasn't on that flight, that I had been lying to her all this time? That maybe I hadn't even flown out, that I had just disappeared, leaving her in the dark. I knew that if she figured it out, if she started to suspect that I wasn't on that flight, if she found the smallest confirmation that her trust had been shattered, I would lose her. But the scariest part wasn't that. The scariest part was that I didn't know if I could live with that truth. I realized that everything I had built would collapse the moment she discovered the truth. But at some point, I realized I wouldn't be able to hide it any longer. I didn't know what would happen when Lucy started taking action, when she gathered the proof that I wasn't on that flight. I didn't know what I would do if she figured out that I had lied to her. There was no way back. I couldn't keep living this life with Rachel, but I couldn't go home either. Lucy would find out, and everything would collapse. The life I had built, the illusion I had maintained, would fall apart in one moment. I could feel that moment drawing closer. Lucy would soon begin to suspect, and I would have to do something about it. But I didn't know what exactly. At that moment, when I was already desperate, I understood that time was running out. She already knew. Or at least, she was ready to find out. I sat in the same room, in the same spot, but everything around me felt foreign. Every sound, every glance, every movement, it all felt like a lie. I couldn't hide anymore. I couldn't keep living in this double world. I couldn't be with Rachel and at the same time not be with her. I couldn't be alive to one and dead to the other. I thought about what Lucy would feel when she found out I wasn't on that flight. How would she feel when she realized I had been lying to her all these days, months, years? I couldn't allow myself to think about what would happen next, but despite that, I couldn't stop these thoughts from circling in my mind. What would I tell her? How could I explain that I was trapped, that I couldn't break free from this? How would she react to everything I had done? I knew I couldn't keep living like this. My life was in ruins, and I didn't know how to rise from it. I couldn't go back home, not knowing what awaited me. I knew Lucy would be waiting for me, but I wasn't the same man who had left. She was sitting at home, thinking I was dead. And in that moment, when I knew I couldn't live in these false worlds any longer, when there was no way back, I realized I would have to make a choice. The lie could not continue. Rachel was sitting next to me, and I could see that she felt something was wrong. Her growing wariness became more obvious. But I didn't know how to say it. How could I tell the woman I was with that, in reality, I had lied to her just as much as I had lied to Lucy? How could I tell her that none of this was true? I looked at Rachel again, trying to find words, but I didn't know where to begin. She wasn't asking, but I could see her losing confidence in me. I felt how this situation was tightening around me. My world was closing in, and I couldn't justify my actions anymore. I was a person I didn't even recognize. A person who couldn't deal with the consequences of his own mistakes. And in that moment, as I looked at Rachel again, I realized I couldn't hide anymore. What if she finds out? I thought about it, but I didn't know what to say. With each hour, I felt more and more that the truth was inevitable. I was alive, but perhaps I had lost everything I ever had. Lucy believed I was dead, and maybe she was already starting to process that. But I didn't know how to go back, how to tell her I was alive, how to explain that I had ruined my life. It was a painful realization. I was trapped, and there was no way out. I couldn't keep lying, but I couldn't confess to what I had done either. I was lost. And in that moment, as I sat in the room, all of my decisions started to collapse on me. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew something had to give. I didn't know how I would live with this. Rachel noticed my gaze. She felt that something was wrong. But I couldn't tell her the truth. I couldn't destroy everything. I just sat there, feeling my own mistakes closing in on me. I stood up and walked to the window. New York was the same as always, noisy, bright, alive. But for me, it was a foreign place, and I could no longer see it as home. It was an alien world, and I didn't know where my home was anymore. I felt the growing tension inside me reach its breaking point. I couldn't keep it all in. I knew that soon I would have to make a choice. I didn't know when that would happen, but it was inevitable. The truth would come out. Time seemed to flow differently. Everything around me became foreign and distant. I was in New York, but I didn't really exist. My life, as I had known it, was destroyed. I couldn't return to Lucy. I couldn't go home. She was dead to me, just as I was dead to her. I had destroyed everything we had, and now I didn't know how to keep living. Rachel was still here. We kept spending time together, but I no longer felt the comfort I once did. I didn't know what to do with her. With each passing day, I felt the distance growing between us. She didn't say anything directly, but I could see her gaze becoming more cautious. Her confidence was slowly slipping away. She noticed that I wasn't the person I had been before. She felt that something wasn't right, but she couldn't quite understand what it was. And I couldn't, and didn't want to, explain. I tried to be with her, but my thoughts were far away, at the house, where Lucy was grieving my death. I saw her face, imagining how she was coping with the thought that I was gone. I couldn't stay with Rachel, not knowing how this was going to end. I couldn't continue the lie. The more I tried to be with Rachel, the more I realized that I couldn't live in this world. Not with her. Not with Lucy. Not with what I had done. I kept hiding the truth, but I knew I couldn't avoid it forever. The truth would eventually come out. I couldn't stay in this city, not knowing what to do. I was feeling myself slipping away, from Lucy, from Rachel, from myself. I had lost myself the moment I allowed my life to become this lie. I looked at Rachel, sitting next to me, and felt the growing gap between us. She didn't say anything, but I knew. I knew she could feel it. I couldn't hide the truth anymore, but I didn't know how to tell her. I tried to imagine how it would be if I told her I had lied to her, that I had been with her while not being free, that I had destroyed everything I built. I didn't know what would happen with Lucy. She was living in pain, thinking I was dead. But I couldn't go back. I couldn't tell her the truth, because I was afraid of destroying her completely. But I also couldn't keep living in this trap. I couldn't go on hiding what happened. I stood up and walked to the window. The city was the same as always, but I couldn't see it as my own anymore. I felt like a stranger, as if I were just a shadow of who I once was. My present and future were falling apart, and I didn't know where to go. All I knew was that hiding the truth was no longer possible. There was no way back. There was no way to return to what was. I had created this world, but it was crumbling, and I didn't know how to live in it. I didn't know what to do. I thought I could keep hiding it a little longer. But as soon as I decided to leave everything as it was, I realized there was no going back. The lie I had built started to collapse, like a house of cards. I kept feeling the world closing in around me, and despite all my efforts, I couldn't avoid what was inevitably coming. At first, I tried to distract myself. I spent time with Rachel, enjoyed having her around, but deep down I knew it was just a temporary reprieve. I couldn't hide the truth forever. And now, as I felt Lucy growing more and more suspicious, I realized she would find out. She didn't know where I was, but every day I felt that she was starting to sense something was wrong. Maybe it was intuitive, maybe she felt it, but I could tell she would be looking for answers. She would try to figure out what had happened. She'd check passenger lists, search all the possible sources, and find nothing about me. I knew she would be searching for an explanation, that she would feel something wasn't right. Perhaps she didn't even understand what she was searching for, but she would look. And if she found out the truth, everything would fall apart. I knew that at some point, she would figure it out. I sat in the room, and it became hard to breathe. My head was filled with so many thoughts that I felt like I was drowning in them. I realized that Lucy would be looking for answers, that she would try to piece together what I had been hiding. Maybe she didn't understand it yet, but she was already on the path to figuring it out. And I didn't know what I would say when she found the truth. She couldn't write to me. She couldn't reach me. But I knew that everything she was feeling, everything she was thinking, was beyond words. She would be asking questions that I couldn't answer. Rachel sat beside me, and her gaze became more and more wary. I could see she felt something was off. But I couldn't explain it to her. I couldn't tell her that I was alive, that I had been somewhere else, that I had lied to her, betrayed not only her trust but Lucy's as well. I stood by the window, looking out at the city, realizing that time was running out. Lucy couldn't know where I was, but she would still be searching for answers. I couldn't go back, not knowing how this would end. I was trapped in a cage of my own making, and I didn't know how to get out. I didn't know what to do. Time was running out, and I couldn't keep hiding. I had been living this lie all along, and now I realized it was eating me alive. All these days spent with Rachel had felt like a waste, like an escape from what I had created. But now I could see that she felt it too, that something was wrong. She wasn't saying anything, but her gaze had grown more cautious. I thought I could keep going, but I couldn't. Everything I had built, everything I had created, was falling apart in front of my eyes. We were sitting in the hotel room. I looked out the window at the cityscape, but I couldn't see a thing. We were silent. Rachel sat across from me, and I could feel her gaze cutting through me. I knew I couldn't hide the truth anymore. I couldn't leave everything as it was. My life had been built on running from reality, but I could no longer pretend. I couldn't stay with Rachel without explaining to her what had really happened. I thought about how she would react. Would she be able to forgive me? How would she take the truth? And how could I explain it to Lucy? How could I tell her I was alive, that I had lied, that I destroyed everything we had built? My gaze kept falling on the window. I didn't know how to take the first step. Confession was inevitable, and I knew that. I had to confess, both to Rachel and to Lucy. I couldn't continue this nightmare without knowing what to do. I stood up and walked to the window. Rachel was sitting beside me, her gaze now more suspicious. I couldn't hide it any longer. I knew that her feelings, too, were losing certainty. We both knew that we couldn't keep going as we had before. I was ready to take the step that would, perhaps, change everything. But I didn't know how to do it. I took a deep breath, turned abruptly, and walked to the door. I knew I had to leave. I had to explain, but I didn't know how to say the words that would destroy everything. I didn't know if I could handle the consequences. But there was no going back now. I reached the door, slowly opened it, and felt the tension rising inside. I had no choice. I stepped into a hallway, not looking back, knowing that I couldn't return anymore. I didn't know what would happen next, but I knew I couldn't stay in this paralysis any longer. I was in New York, but I wasn't really here. My body was here, but my thoughts and emotions were back home, with Lucy. She thought I was dead. I was alive, but I couldn't keep hiding that anymore. I couldn't stay in this city, not knowing what would happen with Lucy, not knowing how to explain to her that I wasn't on that flight. How would she take the truth? She lost me, believing I was gone forever. How do you come back to a life that's been destroyed and explain that you've been alive this whole time? With each passing day spent here, I could feel myself slipping away. I knew that if I didn't go back home and tell her the truth, I would live in this nightmare for the rest of my life. I packed my things and left the room. I didn't have a plan. I only knew one thing: I had to go home. There was no more time. I couldn't keep hiding. On my way to the train station, I felt my anxiety growing. I was heading back to my hometown, and I had no idea what awaited me there. Lucy thought I was dead, and I was about to walk into that devastation. I didn't know how I would tell her the truth, that I had been with another woman, that I had lied to her. I didn't know how she would react, but I knew I couldn't hide any longer. When the train arrived in my city, I stepped off the platform and felt my heart start to race. I didn't know what was waiting for me. Lucy had been waiting, thinking I would never return. But I had to see her. I had to tell her the truth. I walked through familiar streets, but they felt strange now. This city was my home, but it no longer felt like it. My life, my family, everything had changed. I reached the house where Lucy and I had once built a future, and I felt a sharp pain in my chest. I stood at the door. I didn't know how to make the first move. Should I knock? Or just walk in? But I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I couldn't continue living in this world of lies. I had to return to my life. Not the one that was, but the one where I was honest. I knocked. I stood at the door, my heart pounding so loudly I felt it might explode. Each beat echoed in my ears like a thunderclap, ready to tear everything apart. I didn't know what would happen next, but one thing was clear: I couldn't return to the life I had before. Everything had changed. Lucy was waiting for an answer I didn't know how to give. I froze, unable to take the next step. Why had I come? To destroy what little was left? To ruin her life and mine? But I knew I couldn't stay silent any longer. I couldn't keep living in this nightmare. Lucy had probably spent all this time trying to figure out what had happened, believing I was dead. And I had become nothing more than a ghost to her, a broken memory. I knocked. The sound was sharp and jarring, as though it had pierced the air. There was no response. I knocked again, and the door opened. She was standing there, pale, but she didn't look surprised. It was as if she had already known I would return, but didn't know how to react. I stood there, unable to say anything. In her eyes I saw pain, exhaustion, disappointment. She didn't speak. I stood still, not knowing how to begin. All I wanted was for her to understand how sorry I was, but I knew it wouldn't help. I couldn't return to the person I had been before, when we were happy. I couldn't regain her trust, which I had shattered. I knew that even if I told her everything, even if I revealed the truth, nothing would change. It would be the end. Everything I had built, everything we had gone through together, none of it could be restored. I was the one who destroyed it all. She didn't ask, didn't scream, didn't accuse me. She just stood there, looking at me. I understood that I had become a stranger to her. I had become someone she no longer recognized. I took a step toward her, but she stepped back. I felt the gap growing between us. All the years, all the memories, all the love we had once shared, it all vanished in an instant. I had lost her. I had lost myself. In that moment, I realized that we could never return to what we once had. I stood there, unable to find words. I couldn't fix anything. The door closed behind me as I stood there in the hallway, alone. I realized I had destroyed her, destroyed us. And I didn't know what would happen next. I had lost everything. A lot of time had passed before I truly understood what had happened. Lucy forgave me, but that process was long, painful, and filled with hurt. I still remember the way she looked at me those first days after I returned. She didn't forgive me right away. With every look, with every step, it was clear she was battling herself. We didn't speak much. She didn't yell, didn't accuse me. She just stayed silent, giving both of us time to understand what had been broken and what could be rebuilt. I never expected her to forgive me immediately. And that was right. She was exhausted, but she understood that, despite everything, I was alive, and that meant more than I could ever imagine. Alive, that was the most important thing. And that was what allowed her to take the first step toward forgiveness. But forgiveness wasn't instant. It was a long process. Months passed, filled with heavy silences, tension, and a lack of words that could heal the wound I had caused. I remember when she started talking to me about her feelings, about what she had thought and felt, about how long it had taken her to come to this decision. It wasn't easy for her. She couldn't just forget what I had done. She couldn't ignore the betrayal. But she chose me, despite everything. She chose to let me back into her life, and that was the hardest, but also the most important moment in our journey. She told me that what mattered most was that I was alive. At first, she didn't know how to feel about it, didn't know if it was possible to move forward, but when I was with her, when we started to rebuild even the smallest foundation, she decided that she was ready to forgive. The process was difficult. I couldn't bring back what was, but I could work to earn her trust again. She knew we couldn't simply go back to what we were before I betrayed her. This was a new path we had to walk together. I remember how she started to smile at me again, though those smiles were small, tentative. Every such smile felt like a victory, a step forward. When we began talking about the future, about what would come, I could see her trying to let go of the past. It was hard and painful, but she was doing it. And I was doing everything I could to be the man she could trust again. This wasn't a return to the old. We didn't go back to the same relationship. We started from scratch, on the ruins I had created. But every step was meaningful, every moment together felt like a win for both of us. She forgave me, not because I deserved it, but because she chose to live with it. She chose me. I understand now that it wasn't easy for her. I saw how difficult it was for her every single day to forgive me. But she gave me a chance. And it's a chance I'll always cherish and protect. We began again, not forgetting what had happened, but realizing that forgiveness is not forgetting. It's the choice to move forward. And she chose to move forward with me. I didn't know what lay ahead. I didn't know how long it would take to regain her trust. But now, when I look back at everything, I understand that her forgiveness became the most important thing that happened in my life. I was alive, and that was enough for her to forgive me. But it wasn't an easy road. It was a long, hard road for both of us. And I'm thankful she let me back in. I came back, but not to the world that was. I came back to the one we had to build together. Forgiveness wasn't the end, it was the beginning. The beginning of a new path. And we walked that path, step by step, understanding that every day was a new chance for recovery.